Hi everyone, welcome to part two in the first session of your Working with Data training series. In this video, we're going to look at a few more handy formulas that can be used to support your data analysis. This will be following on from the previous video where we looked at a few ways to sum data as well as being introduced to your absolute value. Today, we'll be focusing on 5 new formulas that are really handy. That is your average formula, your how to find your highest value, how to find your lowest value in a data set, as well as 2 formulas called count and COUNTIF, which I'll explain in a bit more detail at the time. I'll also be showing you a really handy tip that I use really often when working with Excel. I think is probably one of the best things to know that quite a lot of people don't know about, and it really helps you see all of your formulas on a spreadsheet in one place. In this video, we will be working with the same data training set as we did in the previous, which as before, I encourage you to have up and running while you are working alongside me. So as you can see, this is the spreadsheet that we were working on last time. We added all of our formulas in to get the sum. We also looked at our kind of yearly rates broken down by number of staff and introduced the idea, as I said, of your absolute value. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at a few more formulas that are quite basic, but really helpful when working with data, help you understand a little bit more about the data. And they are particularly useful when you are working with bigger data sets. This is obviously quite a small one, but as your data sets start to become larger and larger, and it's hard to do this kind of analysis with the naked eye, these formulas really come in handy. So the first one that we're going to look at is your average formula, and it does kind of what it says on the tin. It tells you what the average value of your data set that you select is. And it's really easy to get there. As always, you click on the cell that you want to input your data into and start with equals. You type in average, you can see it brings up a number of different options, but we're just sticking with the basic average formula. You use your bracket to open and you select your data set, drag down, close your bracket and hit enter. And as you can see, that has calculated the average for January of all of the different line items. So you've got your 4 values and you've got the average over there. So really easy, but as I said, when you're working with maybe 100 rows of data, it might be more tricky just to do that with a quick sum or with the naked eye, and that's where these formulas really start to come in handy. Similar with the next two, the formula that we'll be looking at to get our highest monthly cost is the max formula. And how that works is you start with your equal sign, type in max, open your bracket, again, select your data set, close bracket and hit enter. And what that's done is it searched through the data set or the array that we've selected, and it has returned the highest value. So if we were just doing this with the naked eye, we could of course see that. But when you're starting to work with rows and rows and rows of data, it might be more difficult to identify. So there we are, that has returned the highest. Equally, we might want to know what the lowest monthly cost is. And so in that instance, we would start with our equal sign, type in min, open bracket, again, select the data set you want to look at, close bracket and hit enter. And that has generated the lowest value in that data set. So it doesn't change any of the values as it did with average. It's not bringing up anything new. It's just analyzing the data against the question, i.e. the formula that you asked, and it is showing you that particular answer. And what we asked was the highest value and the lowest value. The next formula is really handy when you're working with big data sets that might have blank spaces in them. So this is the count formula, and we'll look at 2 different versions of this formula, which will be used in slightly different circumstances. So we'll start with just your plain old count formula. And how we do that is we hit equals, type in count and open bracket. We then select our data, and for this particular one, we've been asked to count how many values there are in January. We close our bracket and hit enter. And as you can see there, it has generated 4. So if we look with the naked eye, we can see there are 1, 2, 3, 4 cells in the data range that we selected that contain a value. So this is not necessarily telling you about the values in those cells themselves, but it's rather just telling you how many cells contain a value of any kind. So if we wanted to say, do the same thing for June, what we would do is we would equals count, open brackets, select our range or our array, and we would close bracket. Now, as you can see, this has generated the same answer as it did for January. But even with the naked eye, we can see that's probably not right, because as you can see here, the value is actually 0. However, the way that Excel works is it registers 0 even as a value, because we're working with numbers, with currency here, but other instances 0 might represent something. So it is actually counting that. But because we're working with currency and we want to know only where it has actually cost us something, in what line items has it actually generated a value for the month of June, we would use something called a COUNTIF formula. So how that would work is we start with our equal sign, type in count, and then we type in COUNTIF and open bracket. Then we select our range. So we're going for June. Now, this is where it differs from the count formula. You type in your comma to separate your formula out. It's now asking you for something different. And if you look at the formula bar here, it's actually telling you a little bit about what you have to do to generate that answer. So range, as I said, is the data that we wanted to analyze, and we've selected that. That's the 4 line items for the month of June. But criteria is what we want to select it against. So in this instance, we just want to know the months where there was some cost to the organization. So what we would do is we would start with opening our quotations like that, because that tells the computer that we're about to show it what the criteria needs to be. We do a greater than sign because we want it to be greater than 0. We close our line item and we hit enter. Now you can see that looks a bit more sensible, doesn't it? We can see that it has not counted heat for June, because we're having a really hot summer. You know, we can live in hope. So we've not had to use the heating. So it's only those 3 line items that it has generated a value for. Equally, if we were asked, we want to understand, we've set a budget for each line item of £300, and we want to know how often in the month of June those line items have exceeded that value. What we would do instead is we go into our formula and we change 0 to 300, because we want to know all of the instances where it is greater than 300. We hit enter and we can see that it's given us the answer 2. And that looks right just looking at it. We've got a 0, we've got a 40. We know those are both within budget, under 300, but 500 and 1,000 are both above budget. So again, this is really helpful with bigger data sets where you can't just use the naked eye to kind of analyze the data. You really want the formulas to be doing the hard work for you. And so these are some key ones that I would really, really recommend. Now, my favorite thing that I was telling you I was going to show you is how to look at all of your formulas. So if you were, for example, to inherit this spreadsheet, from somebody and you didn't really understand exactly what was formulas, what was manually inputted, or what the formulas were asking. For example, this says count June. It doesn't necessarily, so we're thinking it's telling us how many values are there for June, but we don't necessarily know that at that point the person has decided that they only want to see count in June for values above 300. So how would we go about figuring that out? Well, we could, of course, click on the cell and look up here and see it there, but that could be time consuming trying to figure out where all of the values are. For example, that might be a formula to the naked eye because we know that these are. So how do we figure that out quickly? So My top tip is this. If you hit Control, and then I'm going to paste what it looks like in the spreadsheet because it's a little bit difficult to describe. You hit Control and that little button on your keyboard, for me, it's right in the top left-hand corner. I'm not sure what it's called. It's like a little sideways walking stick. But if you hit Control and then that sign on your computer, you can see what it does. It shows you all of the formulas. So instead of showing you the result of the formula, it shows the formula itself. This is really helpful for sense checking. If something is going wrong, or as I've said, you've inherited a spreadsheet and you're not quite sure what's going on, or something doesn't look right, or you just want to understand how it's working, this is a really, really helpful tip to show you what exactly is happening in your spreadsheet. Similarly, to get out of this back to your normal view, you hit Control and your little walking stick sign again, and it takes you straight back. That's something I wish I'd learned a lot sooner into using Excel. Somebody showed it to me, and it's not dramatic to say it changed my life. So hopefully it's done the same for you. Just to recap what we've looked at in this video, we've looked at the average formula. So how do we get the average for a data set? What is the fastest way to show us the highest number in a data set as well as the lowest? We've looked at plain old count. How do we count the number of times that there is a value in a particular data set? And we've looked at the COUNTIF, which helps us analyze a bit more the count function, either below a certain value or equal to a certain value, whatever it may be. So hopefully that has been helpful, and I will see you in our next session.